Some minds don't rest when the body stops moving. Even in quiet rooms, even in moments meant for recovery, something inside keeps scanning, listening, lightly braced. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels normal, almost invisible, like background hum you only notice when it briefly disappears. You may have learned to call this overthinking, or sensitivity, or a flaw to manage, but often it began as awareness, sharpened slowly by experience. The mind adapted to stay slightly ahead, slightly alert, just in case. This video isn't about fixing that state. It's about understanding why rest, for some people, never fully arrives as silence, and why that doesn't mean the mind is broken. It means it learned a different rhythm of safety. The surface restlessness we learn to hide. On the surface, it often looks like impatience, a foot that moves without asking, a mind that drifts even during calm conversations. You may have learned to keep this subtle restlessness out of sight, training yourself to appear composed, while something inside keeps adjusting, monitoring, preparing. This isn't chaos, it's regulation. At some point, stillness became associated with risk, not comfort. So the body learned small movements, quiet thoughts, gentle tension, as a way to stay ready without drawing attention. The misunderstanding comes when this state is judged as a lack of discipline. But what if it's actually a skill, practiced so long it became automatic? The question isn't why you can't rest, but what you once needed to stay alert for, even when nothing seems to be happening now. When awareness becomes a constant background noise. At first, awareness feels like clarity. You notice shifts in tone, small changes in energy, details others move past without registering. Over time, that sensitivity stops turning off. It becomes a low, continuous signal running beneath every moment, like static you no longer question. The mind isn't racing, it's listening, tracking patterns, weighing meanings, staying slightly ahead of what might be asked next. Silence doesn't quiet it, because silence leaves more room to scan. This is where rest begins to feel unfamiliar. Not because the mind is loud, but because it never fully disengages from the world. What once helped you understand more now asks for constant participation, even when nothing is required of you. The quiet cost of always noticing more than necessary. There is a cost to noticing everything, and it's rarely visible from the outside. It shows up as a subtle fatigue that rest doesn't seem to touch, a tiredness that isn't about effort but about exposure. When the mind keeps receiving more information than it needs, even neutral moments can feel crowded. This kind of exhaustion isn't dramatic. It doesn't collapse you, it fins you. Decisions take longer. Emotions blur at the edges. You may find yourself withdrawing, not because you dislike people, but because every interaction asks for more processing than you can easily spare. The quiet misunderstanding is that this looks like disinterest or avoidance, but often it's conservation. A system that learned to survive by noticing learned, too late, how little relief comes from staying open all the time. The mind isn't overactive, it's overexposed, and it hasn't been taught how to close the door without guilt. For some minds, rest was never modeled as safety. It was something that happened after vigilance, not alongside it. So even when life becomes quieter, the internal posture doesn't update. The body slows, but the mind stays slightly forward, as if calm were temporary. This isn't anxiety in the dramatic sense, it's continuity. The nervous system learned that awareness kept things manageable, predictable, less surprising. Letting go feels less like relief and more like exposure. So rest becomes partial, fragmented. You may sit still, sleep, even enjoy moments, yet part of you remains on duty. Not because you don't trust the world, but because your system hasn't been shown, consistently enough, that nothing is required of it now. How vigilance slowly replaces spontaneity. Over time, vigilance doesn't feel like effort. It feels like responsibility. The mind learns to check before it moves, to sense before it responds, to anticipate before it relaxes. Spontaneity doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades, quietly replaced by a preference for control that feels safer than surprise. You may notice this in small pauses, the extra second before you speak, The way joy arrives already filtered through caution. It's not suppression, it's calibration, an inner system trained to reduce regret, to minimize disruption, even at the cost of lightness. From the outside, this looks like seriousness. From the inside, it feels like maturity that never fully rests. The loss isn't excitement, it's ease. And the mind doesn't mourn it loudly because it learned early that staying prepared mattered more than feeling free. The nervous system's habit of staying slightly awake. Eventually, this vigilance settles deeper than thought. It becomes a bodily habit, a baseline tone in the nervous system that stays just above rest, even when nothing is happening. You're not tense in an obvious way. You're simply never fully offline. This is why rest can feel unsatisfying. Sleep happens, but recovery feels incomplete. Calm moments arrive, but they don't land. The body learned that staying responsive prevented overwhelm, so it keeps a quiet watch, even in safety. What's difficult is that this state doesn't feel wrong from the inside. It feels familiar. Letting go isn't resisted by fear, but by habit. A system that adapted well enough to survive, yet never learned how to power down without first checking if it's truly allowed. Rest as a state of safety, not the absence of thought. For a mind like this, rest was never about silence. It was about safety. And safety was never guaranteed by the absence of thought, only by the presence of awareness. So even when the mind slows, it doesn't empty. It settles into a watchful quiet, one that still listens for shifts, still tracks what might matter. This is where many misunderstandings end. The goal was never to stop thinking. It was to feel unthreatened while thinking continues. When that safety isn't fully internalized, rest feels conditional, something that can be interrupted at any moment. What changes things isn't forcing calm or demanding stillness. It's the slow recognition that rest arrives when the system no longer has to prove readiness. Not when the mind goes blank, but when it's finally allowed to exist without a task. A mind that never fully rests is not failing at calm. It is remembering something it once needed to survive. What looks like constant awareness is often loyalty to an old rule. Stay ready, stay open, stay ahead. There is no moment where this suddenly switches off, because it was never a switch, it was a posture. Understanding this doesn't erase vigilance, it softens the judgment around it. And sometimes, that is the first form of rest such a mind can recognize. Not silence, not emptiness, just the quiet relief of no longer having to explain why stillness never felt simple.